Evening, folks. Brian here, Geomagnetic Earthwatch on Thursday, June 21, 2023, in our planet. Hope you're all well. So, I've noticed surprisingly over the past 24 hours, all of a sudden I had between 200 and 300 additional people join me on my Facebook. Welcome. And they're still flooding in. So I'd like to better introduce myself, although I have an introduction video on my YouTube channel. And please come on over to my YouTube channel under the same name, Geomagnetic Earthwatch. Subscribe and hit the notification button. Basically, everything that I post on Facebook goes onto YouTube. Or rather, everything that goes onto YouTube mostly comes onto my Facebook anyway. So my name is Brian, Canadian citizen living in the province of British Columbia, Canada. And I am an independent researcher, as everybody else is on YouTube. And I started my research initially covering the grand solar minimum, but that developed into the more important geomagnetic excursion, which is a cyclical process our planet goes through every 12,000 years. So I'm gonna try and keep this all condensed to about 30 minutes. Explain why I'm here and what I cover and why I'm covering it, and the significance of my daily posts. So again, our planet is undergoing a current geomagnetic excursion. It's not a physical pole shift. I'll explain in a moment. So our planet Earth is enveloped and protected by what's called a geomagnetic field or magnetosphere. I guess the best analogy is, if any of you are familiar with the old Star Trek series, Shields Up, Scotty. The shields that go around the Starship Enterprise. So our magnetic field is essentially the same thing. Now I'll use the adjective protective, so you understand the purpose of the magnetosphere, which is to protect the planet from harmful cosmic radiation, ultraviolet radiation, and galactic cosmic rays. I'll get to that in a moment. So our magnetic field is generated from within the outer core of our planet. The magnetic field comes out of the south polar region and envelops the planet. And the magnetic field or field lines re-emerge back through the north polar cusp, the north magnetic pole, not the axial North Pole, not Santa Claus North Pole. We have two poles. I'll show you in a moment. So anyway, our protective magnetosphere protects us from the highly charged particles we call cosmic rays, which are mostly mostly protons and some electrons, as well as galactic cosmic rays, which are the remnants of supernovas. Before I continue, I'm going to back up a step. So I sometimes may feel a little bit groggy and trip over my tongue. I have a young autistic daughter under my care, and most nights I get only 5 hours sleep. So obviously that is first and foremost the care of my daughter. Then I'm here. So just so you know, if I'm not always so vibrant and bouncy, alive like some of the other YouTubers, and I feel a little bit groggy, that's the reasons why. Continue. So in order to have, okay, this orange is our planet Earth. The sticks coming out represent the magnetic poles. So in order to have a 100% full strength protective magnetic field, the magnetic poles need to be more or less in antipodal positions. Antipodal means exactly opposite to one another. So again, the magnetic field leaves south magnetic pole, envelops, and comes back in to the north magnetic pole. However, folks, every 12,000 years something happens. They go on what's called an excursion. Now, while the magnetic poles are more or less in a stable position, more or less, they can meander about, right? They'll tour around, right? Northern Canada, Arctic. However, every 12,000 years, they'll go on an excursion and they will leave their more or less stable position. So currently, our geomagnetic poles are like this. So they are no longer in antipodal positions. This results in the destabilization and weakening of the magnetic field lines, thus allowing increased levels of harmful cosmic radiation and ultraviolet radiation. I'll explain that in a moment. So this process happens every 12,000 years. However, every 42,000 years, we go through what's called an extinction level event. We are now at that 42,000 year point in time. The last one was the extinction of most of the Neanderthals. So we have two things, and it's completely irrelevant which it's going to be. We have a geomagnetic excursion. Then we have a full geomagnetic reversal, flip of the poles, which happens, and you're going to find different dates, time periods, every 200 to 300,000 years. The last one was 780,000 years ago. Folks, please keep in mind that this process takes thousands of years to complete. Now, you will find some articles where some will dispute that and say that can happen 10 times faster, therefore hundreds of years. The average is 7,000 years or 700 years. The current excursion started in 1903, leaving Nunavut, Canada. Technically, it really started in September 1859, caused by the Carrington event, which was an X-45 class solar flare that blasted off from the sun. And that CME hit the planet. Basically gave magnetic north a kick in the butt and said, "Get going." Excuse me. So remember this visualization. I'm going to come back to it in a minute. If the excursion continues, the meeting point will be somewhere in the Bay of Bengal to Indian Ocean on the west side of Sumatra, Indonesia, if it continues. It is irrelevant to us here currently now whether it's going to result in a full geomagnetic excursion, pole flip, ooh, you heard that so many times, or continue on an excursion and north will settle somewhere in Siberia. So once again, our protective magnetosphere is destabilized and weakening. It is believed we have lost approximately 25% field strength. So that's where we're at right now. Excuse me a minute. So now I'm going to bring in another subject, and that is the religious context on a timeline. And if you are a believer in Scripture and you understand the book of Revelation and the period of tribulation, then you have to understand biblical wormwood. Others might call it Nibiru, Planet X. But you need to understand the science. the effects of a large celestial body, larger and denser than our planet, coming in to our orbital plane, and the gravitational and electromagnetic effects it'll have on our planet, and indeed on the rest of our planets as they are responding currently. Now, Planet X actually was formally announced or discovered by NASA in 1979. At that time, they called it Planet Xena, Xena. 1979, they launched. Back up a step. It was discovered through a radio telescope. 1979, they launched Pioneer 10, and shortly afterwards, Pioneer 11. The purpose of these two probes was to do a triangulation along with the radio telescope observation to better pinpoint the location and orbital approach of Planet X. Now, there is one other gentleman you will hear me give reference to, and that is Mr. John Moore, also called the Liberty Man. Now, Mr. Moore does extensive coverage and reporting and articles on Planet X. Mr. Moore is a former Vietnam veteran, Special Forces, Green Beret, PSYOPs, intelligence, Middle East intelligence. When he retired, he is a former homicide detective. He still maintains contacts with high-level officials in intelligence in the U.S. Navy. Some of you have heard of Mr. Moore, so I follow him. I believe in him. You can also find him on Mike Adams' Brighteon. He gives a number of talks on his platform. So right now, my main focus, and you have to take in consideration everything else that is happening clearly for those who are awake at the beast system, which is being set up, that timeline, the Earth changes, and everything else. So my focus right now is the Earth changes, how planet Earth is responding in many different ways, as outlined in Scripture, Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark, Isaiah, all the rest of the boys. See, he has his playlist, and he sent it down long ago. It's all there for you to look at. And some of the things I go through are based on one, Scripture, two, the current geomagnetic excursion and how it's affecting our planet, and three, again, everything that Mr. John Moore has outlined. So let's start off with the earthquakes. You will notice me making daily posts of earthquakes in diverse places, many different places where we normally do not have earthquakes. And they are happening almost daily now. I've given them many examples in some of my previous posts. I'll just go through a few of them. The 5.8 downgraded to 5.3 in France the same day. Sao Paulo, Brazil. Off the coast of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, several magnitude 4 earthquakes. That location sound familiar. And heck, you know what? I'm not going to waste my time on this video. There's a whole bunch listed. So my focus is on the earthquakes and the manner, the behavior in which earthquakes are happening now. This includes a great increase in deep earthquake events in locations where we don't have deep earthquake events. Second, you will find me make reference to and make posts of heat anomalies coming up, heat from the outer core expansion, and I'm going to briefly explain. So quite often you're going to see me do this. So again, mantle plumes are long columns of hotter magmatic material coming up through the mantle. Mantle plumes are anchored to the outer core of our planet where a magnetic field is generated from. Obviously, there's changes happening there because of the magnetic excursion. Mantle plumes rise up through the mantle to the underside of the lithosphere in which the crust sits upon. As it comes to the underside of the lithosphere, it creates what's called a mantle plume head, which can be thousands of kilometers in diameter. So you can have branches, arms, nodes pushing up through the underside of the lithosphere. There's also another term called lithospheric melting, the heat melting the underside of the lithosphere. And my theory is that heat is finding its way and is penetrating up through the crust, hence all our fires. So mantle plumes, crust, or lithosphere, crust. Second, I watch very closely the global tsunami buoys. Now, folks, our tsunami buoys are anchored to the ocean floor. If there's going to be any movement of the ocean floor, subsidence or inflation, those tsunami buoys are going to be going into motion. There's 4 locations on our planet thus far that periodically go into motion in the absence of earthquake. They are the East Timor Sea entrance into the Indian Ocean off the coast of Australia, between Australia and Indonesia. Second, north of Sumatra, Andaman Sea. Third, axial seamount, underwater volcano off the coast of Washington. And finally, off the coast of New York and Nova Scotia. Off the coast of New York, we have a line of undersea mounts. Periodically, a tsunami buoy on either side will go into motion. So that's why I cover and report on the ocean buoys. Next, so regardless of whether or not you believe in biblical wormwood, and again, if we have a large celestial body coming in within our orbital plane, planet Earth will be responding both gravitationally, electromagnetically, as well as ocean inundation and a complete breakdown of our jet streams. Let's go back to planet Orange for a minute. So we're currently, more or less, this is where our geomagnetic poles are. Over Siberia, Russia, south has already left continental Antarctica and is in the ocean between Antarctica and Australia. If they continue, right, moving closer to each other, closing up the gap. Now, there's an important thing you need to realize. They're further away from the magnetic poles, the weaker the protected magnetic field over that region of the planet. So they are drawing closer together, increasing the distance between the 2 magnetic poles. What's on the other side? What's on the other side is North America, Central America, where our jet streams have gone beyond chaotic. Looks like they're getting ready to totally break down. Hence all of our drastic weather events in North America. That's my theory. Mine alone. Anyway. So our planet is responding, at least to its weakening protective magnetic field. Now, let's talk a little bit about Cosmic rays. So cosmic rays is a common term, and really they are highly charged particles, mostly protons and some electrons. The planet itself, and us humans and animals, we don't like those. Our brains can't handle it anyway. So when a cosmic rays enters our atmosphere, a reaction takes place with the atmospheric atoms, causing or creating secondary particles, showering particles we call muons. These muons can and do penetrate through the Earth's crust, and they do cause what's called bubble nucleation of silica-rich magma, causing an ascent or rise of magma. Again, folks, okay, up through the mantle plumes. That rising hot material coming up, causing earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, fires. I don't want to get too much into that. I'll try and do a second video. This is just basically an introduction to who I am and why I'm covering what I'm covering on a daily basis. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, if you're a believer, if you're a religious person, you understand a timeline. You understand the beginning of sorrows. You understand the events that must happen before certain other things happen. You realize that we have to have the earthquakes in diverse places and catastrophic earthquakes and the volcanic eruptions, the famines, the pestilence, the signs and the great wonders and terrors from the skies above. All these things must first come to pass before we really get heavy into it. And it is my belief, my observation, through critical thinking and a little bit of maturity and aged wisdom, that we are just about to go through that period of time. And if true that biblical wormwood, Nibiru, Planet X, whatever you want to call it, if you believe in it, you have to expect the planet Earth to begin to respond. Now, perhaps I'll mention one more thing. Again, this comes from Mr. John Moore. When they realized the truth of Planet X and the implications it's going to have on our planet with the earthquakes and the ocean inundations and the swallowing up of coastal cities, etc., they had to come up with a cover story. They can't have people coming into this knowledge and panicking. So they had to develop a cover story. The cover story was the man-made global warming narrative. And wait a minute, let's throw in some carbon tax because we need that money to build our bunkers and all the supplies. It's not just the bunkers, people. It's everything they have to put in those bunkers. So people like John Kerry and Al Gore, you think they're idiots? No. They're all part of the game. They're all part of the plan. They're actors pushing the man-made global warming. People who think they're idiots are of themselves a little bit clueless. They had to come up with a cover story to explain such things as the dramatic sea level rise. These things will become reality. Have you not noticed a great increase in articles from the United Nations forewarning us and using terms such as biblical, flooding of coastal cities, etc.? Half of the world's lakes drying up, losing our water resources. So this brings into another theory of mine. Our energy crisis, our oil and natural gas reserves below our feet, rising heat, lithospheric melting, the loss of our oil and gas and water reserves below our feet. Consider it. Now, Mr. John Moore did state in one of his articles, going back to the year 2006, please pay attention to this. He wrote and or stated, it is easier to impose martial law on a population if that population is already under lockdown. And in his article in 2006, he stated or suggested, oh, I don't know, how about a pandemic? You create a pandemic, you have a reason to impose lockdown on what is the World Health Organization want in place by May 2024. Overall power over all countries to impose lockdowns and mandatory this, etc. They seem to be in a hurry to do these things. If you can already get people under a lockdown, and the first one was just a trial test, then when it comes time to bring out the troops, what's happening in the United States and Canada recently? Trial run. If everybody's already locked down. So I have been adamant in a timeline of by 2025, and I'm not the only one. I might suggest moving up that timeline to 2024. As far as you to start preparing in whatever way you can to ensure that you don't get caught in the beast system. Another analogy I will use, have used. Society is traveling down a highway and it's only going in one direction. At the end of that highway is the beast system, a point of no return. You pass a certain point and that toll gate is going to close behind you. You're not going to get out. However, all highways have exit ramps to alternative points of living, surviving. Time is running out to find those off-ramps to get off that highway pretty quick. Establish your tribes, your community. Find your like-minded people. Don't get stuck within the beast system, which is being prepared right now for you. So everything, if you understand scripture, everything is coming together very, very neatly. Everything that's happened, including the orchestrated distractions. If I am correct, if people like John Moore are correct, if I'm correct based on my daily observations and reporting to you, and if Mr. John Moore is correct, and that timeline is very fast closing in, do you really believe everything that's happening in places like Ukraine? Do they not have to keep us distracted? The Cuban Missile Crisis was 13 days, which could have brought the world on the brink of, at the very least, a nuclear exchange. What's going on in Europe has been going on for what, you tell me, 500 days plus? Do you really believe everything that's going on, or you think maybe that's just all part of the plan, the orchestrated distraction? A lot of rabbit holes out there. A conspiracy is only a conspiracy until it becomes reality. That's all, folks. 29 minutes and 11 seconds. I wanted to keep it under 30 minutes. Again, welcome. I try and do my daily updates. At the very least, my postings on Facebook. I do have, I'm also on Rumble, where I can speak more freely. I haven't used it in a long, long time. Just every time I make a posting on YouTube or Facebook, it automatically goes to Rumble. So that is my backup platform in case all of a sudden I disappear off of Facebook and YouTube. Thank you all for taking the time to listen. See you tomorrow.